Iran has already secured $21 billion in revenue from 150 million barrels of oil already at sea, pre-contracted and moving towards buyers. So, what exactly is the United States Navy's blockade achieving in the Persian Gulf? Sources close to the decision-making process, individuals who have operated within the system where these choices are forged, and the vocabulary of authority is shaped, assert with total confidence that those directing this operation are either knowingly misleading the American people or are so recklessly incompetent that the distinction no longer matters. The mainstream conversation is entirely missing the point. It's not just about the blockade, nor solely about the looming possibility of a second wave of strikes against Iran. It's about what this entire episode exposes regarding the true state of American power on the world stage today. And that picture, we assure you, is considerably grimmer than anything currently being presented. Let's begin with the blockade itself, where the dishonesty is most exposed and most consequential. The United States Navy has positioned roughly 3 carrier strike groups across the region. Each group includes between 3 and 4 escort vessels, destroyers, and cruisers, adding in amphibious readiness groups and removing the carriers themselves, as no one maneuvers a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier. Against an oil tanker, what remains are approximately 11 ships actually capable of boarding a vessel. 11 ships against the vast expanse of the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman, through which, since April 15th alone, somewhere between 100 and 200 Iranian vessels have been passing in both directions. The arithmetic is devastating. On a favorable day, perhaps 10% of Iranian maritime traffic is intercepted. On most days, that figure drops closer to 3%. Crucially, the Navy is held 200 miles back from Iranian territorial waters. Any closer, and those ships fall within the operational envelope of Iranian anti-ship missiles. So, Iranian tankers simply navigate within their own 12-mile territorial boundary, remaining comfortably inside a line no American commander will breach. The oil flows. It has been flowing. It is flowing at this very moment. As you absorb this, what most people fail to appreciate is the sheer magnitude of what Iran has already set in motion. According to the most current figures available, Iran had approximately 150 million barrels of oil already at sea, pre-contracted, moving toward buyers at roughly $140 per barrel. One does not require an economics degree to process the implications. That represents approximately $21 billion in revenue already secured, already in transit, entirely outside the reach of any blockade the United States Navy has the operational capacity to enforce. The Treasury Secretary can speak all he wants about squeezing the Iranian economy into submission, but the Iranian economy is drawing breath without difficulty. This blockade is pure performance. It is constructed for television cameras. It is engineered to persuade the American public that maximum pressure is producing results, when the actual battlefield picture tells a completely contrary story. This pre-secured revenue stream fundamentally undermines the immediate impact of any naval interdiction. Historically, blockades aim to choke off future revenue, but Iran's foresight in pre-positioning such a vast quantity of oil demonstrates a strategic preemption rarely seen, rendering the current operation largely symbolic from an economic standpoint. But if you imagine that constitutes the complete picture, it does not. The blockade's absurdity is merely the first act in something substantially more perilous. We are now at day 60 of this conflict. 60 days, which is precisely the threshold that activates obligations under the War Powers Resolution. We want to be precise about what that resolution actually represents, because the public debate contains enormous confusion around it. The War Powers Resolution is, from a constitutional standpoint, a monstrosity. It was conceived as Congress attempting to secure the best of every possible outcome, preserving the ability to condemn a conflict if it deteriorated, while positioning itself to claim authorship if it succeeded. It imposes no genuine restraint on presidential authority. In fact, as one former president stated plainly, it is actually an amplification of that authority. Every administration our sources have been embedded in or adjacent to understood that the resolution's reporting requirements carried no binding weight in any meaningful sense. Presidents deceive their way through them without hesitation. They reset the timeline. They declare suspension. They announce the conflict has ended, wait 48 hours, and begin the cycle again. That is precisely the maneuver the current administration is weighing at this moment. The consistent circumvention of the War Powers Resolution by successive administrations highlights a profound and enduring weakness in legislative oversight of military action. Rather than serving as a check on executive power, It has evolved into a procedural hurdle that presidents routinely navigate, demonstrating a systemic imbalance in the constitutional framework for declaring and conducting war. And here is where the situation takes a genuinely serious turn. Military commanders operating in the region have counseled against any further action. Their assessment is unambiguous. What is achievable through air power has been exhausted. Additional strikes will not deliver the stated objectives. They will deplete weapons inventories that are already running thin. They will introduce escalation risks that cannot be justified by any attainable military outcome. That is the professional assessment of the uniformed military. But there is a separate data point we find considerably more alarming than the air campaign conversation. The deployment of special operations forces into the region has accelerated sharply. This includes not only SEAL Team 6, but conventional SEAL units and components of Delta Force, elements that do not traditionally feature in special operations contingency planning for this theater. There are also credible accounts of serious planning for ground operations targeting nuclear material. When a weapon is armed to that degree, the institutional gravity pulling toward firing it becomes extraordinarily difficult to overcome. The weapon is armed. The question is whether anyone holding authority possesses the strategic judgment to stand it down. Most observers stop at this point, convincing themselves the military will find mechanisms to delay, to stall, to exhaust the clock. And that is precisely why they miss what we are about to lay out. This president has already demonstrated on February 28th that he is fully prepared to override the unanimous counsel of his senior advisors. The decision to launch the original strikes was actively opposed by the majority of people in that room. He disregarded them entirely. There is no basis, none whatsoever, to believe that dynamic has shifted. And now, a phone call from Vladimir Putin, placed from the Russian side, itself a remarkable signal of how seriously Moscow is weighing this moment. The message delivered was without ambiguity. Keep your forces clear of Iran. Russia has anchored itself entirely behind Tehran. That communication was transmitted. Whether it was absorbed in any operationally meaningful way is an entirely separate question. Our understanding, from those who function within the structure that generates these decisions, is that the warning from Moscow is being processed through an ideological filter that classifies Russian statements as inherently bluff-driven and inherently dismissible. That is an extraordinarily reckless cognitive framework to carry into a moment of this magnitude. Putin does not place calls at the presidential level without meticulous calculation. The fact that this represented only the second time he has done so within this particular relationship should communicate something significant about how the Kremlin is interpreting the current trajectory. They are not posturing. They are establishing a documented position ahead of an escalation they believe is already in motion, so that when it materializes, they possess a recorded foundation for their response. That is how serious powers conduct themselves when they are operating in earnest. The administration has been functioning on the premise, a premise we believe originates directly from Israeli intelligence routed through liaison channels, that Iranian leadership is in collapse, that the strikes have crippled the decision-making architecture in Tehran, and that the regime is internally fracturing and approaching disintegration. We have examined carefully the actual profiles of the current Iranian leadership, and what we discovered should genuinely alarm anyone who has absorbed that assumption. The president, the foreign minister, the relevant IRGC commanders, the inner circle around the supreme leader, virtually every one of them is shaped by the Iran-Iraq war. These are combat veterans, men who have confronted existential threat directly, who functioned under fire, who constructed the institutions they now govern from within the furnace of that conflict. The notion that these individuals are paralyzed, disoriented, or approaching surrender is not an intelligence finding. It is a fabrication. It is the category of fiction constructed when justification is required for a conclusion already reached. There is yet another dimension to this that the administration has miscalculated with catastrophic consequences. When a civilian population is bombed, it is not shattered. It is consolidated. Every serious analyst of strategic bombing history comprehends this. The Blitz did not fracture Britain. The bombing campaign against Serbia did not unseat Malic. Shock and awe over Iraq did not generate the grateful, liberated population anyone advertised. What the strikes against Iran have produced is precisely what strikes against civilian-adjacent infrastructure reliably produce: a consolidation of national identity that has delivered to the Iranian government a degree of popular legitimacy it did not fully command before the first bomb was released. Accounts are emerging of ordinary Iranians who 3 months ago would have numbered among the regime's harshest critics, now standing visibly behind their government. This is not from ideological conversion, but from the entirely rational human instinct that activates when an external force attacks your home. This administration has handed the Iranian government a political windfall, and they appear not to recognize it. Now let us address the economic dimension, because this is where we believe the full gravity of strategic miscalculation has not yet penetrated public awareness. The official Pentagon accounting for the cost of this operation sits somewhere between $25 and $28 billion. Estimates drawn from informed alternative sources place the actual figure closer to $50 billion. We have lost a minimum of 49 aircraft. $500 million in airframes were burned on a single afternoon during the recovery mission for one downed crew member. 2 of the radar installations Iran destroyed in the opening days of the engagement carried price tags exceeding $1 billion apiece. When this president assumed office, the national debt stood at $37 trillion. By the end of 2025, it had expanded by $1 trillion. In the first 77 days of 2026, it grew by another trillion. We are at $39 trillion, and the acceleration is not slowing. The interest servicing on that debt is consuming a structural portion of the federal budget that would, in any rationally governed country, trigger an immediate and fundamental reassessment of what we are prosecuting and why. The economic consequences are not theoretical. They are already registering in American households in ways that will translate into political pressure considerably faster than this administration appears to anticipate. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is being drawn down in an effort to suppress fuel prices, and it is failing visibly. In Florida alone, the cost of gasoline has risen 40 cents within 3 days. A fill-up that ran $21 several months ago now demands $52. That is the category of price signal that cuts through even the most disciplined information management. People register it at the pump. They register it in grocery aisles. They register it in mortgage payments they cannot cover. Because the broader inflationary wave generated by 60 days of disruption to Persian Gulf shipping has propagated through every layer of the supply chain. The Strait of Hormuz has been functionally compromised. More than 2,000 vessels are immobilized outside the strait. 15,000 mariners are operating without adequate food and potable water. The damage to global commerce from 60 days of this reality is not a statistical footnote. It is a structural rupture. And if Iran opts to advance to a second tier of target categories, the petroleum infrastructure, the regional energy arteries, the choke points through which a substantial fraction of global oil supply travels, we are no longer discussing a recession. We are discussing a global depression. We want to be precise about that term because we do not invoke it without care. A depression not confined to the United States, but global, including the nations currently observing this from a comfortable distance, persuading themselves this is a regional disturbance they can navigate around. They cannot. The architecture of global energy markets does not permit that kind of insulation. If the strait closes, the global economy follows. That is not analysis. That is arithmetic. The rapid escalation of the national debt to $39 trillion, while simultaneously funding a $50 billion operation, represents an unprecedented fiscal strain. This immediate and visible drain on resources, coupled with direct consumer price hikes, indicates a fundamental shift in the nation's capacity to sustain prolonged military engagements without severe domestic repercussions. This is the point at which we must be completely unambiguous. The United States cannot win this war. We are not speaking in political terms. We are speaking in purely military terms. If every operational plan currently residing on Pentagon shelves, every contingency scenario for every conceivable conflict, were extracted and executed simultaneously against Iran with the complete weight of American military capability behind them, the outcome this administration appears to have convinced itself is within reach could not be compelled. Iran is not a small country. Iran is 2.5 times the geographic size of Texas. It possesses strategic depth, a population with a demonstrated historical willingness to absorb extraordinary costs, and a missile inventory capable of striking every American installation in the region. The Strait of Hormuz is and will remain within effective Iranian operational control, regardless of whatever transpires in the air over the coming weeks. That is geography. That is physics. No accumulation of political determination alters either.